Good evening, folks. Everyone hear me? I apologize for the mask, but I've got those who know me know I've talked too much and the voice is given out. So my name is Debbie Kashish, and I am honored to be the Executive Director for Hospice Huronia. And I'm so grateful that you've decided to join us tonight for this very informative and important conversation. We are going to begin truly having a dialogue in the community, and we're going to call it the dialogue, D-I-E. We're very much a death-defying society, and yet it's something that we are all going to do. The hardest part about death and dying is the loss that's left behind, and for many of you, you know that firsthand. I just want to mention the content, as much as our intention is not to stir up a lot of emotional feelings for you, it's going to be inevitable. And I want you to know that you are here in loving hospice arms. So if my team can just raise your hand here for a moment. You've got Tammy at the back, you've got Christine, Sarah, and Kelly is here somewhere. There's also some of our bereavement volunteers that are here as well. If you feel you need to step out of the room, please do, and we'll just come and check on you. But we know this topic is a challenging one for so many. And again, I just want you to know that the conversations are meant to help us go through some of these most difficult times of our life. So how did we come about tonight? Well, it was a Friday at Tompkins House. You'll notice the baked goods at the back are all made with love by Hospice Kitchen volunteers. And there's no calories. I've already advised several people of that. And that's what we offer, right? We offer comfort. We put the kettle on when people are at our home. But there was one Friday, and I think there must have been 3 phone calls back to back to back. And every time we answered, it was as if, oh my gosh, I don't think I could hear anything worse than what I just heard. I looked out into the front desk. Sarah, our social worker, was off that day, and I had Joanne Byrick out at the front desk answering the phones. So we had a little meeting of the minds. What are we going to do? We are seeing the complexity, the pain, the anguish that we're hearing is so great right now. And I don't know, compared to other years, I think COVID has obviously made a change, but there's something more going on. And we at Hospice have begun to gain trust and a reputation in our community as a safe place to grieve. And we're very proud of that. And one way that we felt, and with Joanne's help, we decided that we were going to reach out to some experts. Joanne came to us as a volunteer. She leads, facilitates our group. Unfortunately, no one wants to join your group. It is our parents that have lost a child. So Joanne deals every day with some of life's most challenging situations. And she said to me, one of her greatest mentors was a gentleman from Hospice Peterborough, David Kennedy. And he had been there for Joanne. And I think David had been 14 years? Yeah, 14 years now. David has been offering support, guidance, care, a glass of wine, I heard. Am I right? Yes. Maybe a glass of wine. Whatever it takes to help people realize that this is a normal part of living, and that where there is great love, great loss, it's because we've had so much love. So David comes to us today. This is going to be an informal conversation. I'm going to grab the microphone down on the floor, and David's going to start us off on this ongoing conversation, and I hope you'll engage. So if you've got a question, put your hand up and I'll come around. Our team also has a few questions that we knew would be asked. Not everyone wants to ask it out in public. If you'd prefer to just talk to one of us or to David privately, just wait to the end and we'll be here for you. You always know where we are. All of our literature is here. Our next sessions are coming up, and we hope that you'll continue the conversation with us. So without further ado, Mr. David Kennedy.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, and thank you so much, Debbie, and for everybody at Hospice Huronia. It's been an amazing time I've spent with you. And I am just amazed. I am amazed you were able to open that facility during COVID. And I am amazed at the incredible group of volunteers and staff that you have. And it will make a huge difference in your community. And I'm so proud of you, and you need to be proud of yourself, and this community needs to be proud of what you've done. And I've certainly come to appreciate Debbie and recognize that leadership makes all the difference when it comes to an organization and where it goes and how it gets there. And both of those pieces are important. And I know that it's in good hands, so congratulations. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. Joanne and I go back a long time in terms of our connections through hospice, and she actually co-facilitated that parents group with me in Peterborough. And it was quite a time, and I appreciate so much her work, and I know that you appreciate her work here as well. Well, so it was quite a topic for tonight, I must admit. I looked at it, and it was looking at life's transition and changes and dealing with everything that happens is pretty broad. I also recognize that life throws a lot of curves at us, doesn't it? We think we have control, and then things happen. And just when we think we have life planned for us, things happen. And how do we deal with this change and the challenges of life? So tonight, as Debbie said, I really want this to be about you. I mean, I can talk about stuff that I know and can share with you, but what I'm more important in is what is it you've come to hear? What is it that you need to talk about tonight? So in order to get to that, let me just take a few minutes, 10 minutes or so, and let me talk to you about what I've come to understand about grief. I've worked in this field for many years, 14 of them at hospice. I had private practice. I taught at University of Toronto in the grief and bereavement, 3 courses there, one in complicated grief, one in spiritual, philosophical, and cultural issues in death and dying, and another one in trauma. So grief has been part of my life in many ways, not just through my educational experiences, but through personal experiences. The losses that we have. And the older we get, the reality is that we all come to experience grief. So let me start very basic with you tonight. And if you hear nothing else, I want you to hear this as I start. Grief is a normal response in life. Grief is a normal reaction to the losses that we experience through death, through other loss types, through fire, relationship. There's all kinds of ways in which we experience loss. And grief is our way of responding to what has happened to us. Now, as I said, I had private practice, been at hospice. One of the things I've come to realize is that we have so pathologized grief that people come saying, I need you to fix me. There's something wrong with me. And the reality is there's nothing wrong with you. Now, grief can get complicated. I agree with that. But the reality is grief is what happens to us. Well, maybe that's a good place for me to start. We hear about these terms. So there's 3 terms that we usually hear about when we talk in this area. One is bereavement. And bereavement, as I am going to use it, is that overarching term that represents the fact that you have experienced a loss in your life. So, death is the most prominent one that we think about. So if you've had somebody that's in your relationships, within your family, friends, connections, co-workers, somebody who died, and you were related to them, then you are bereaved. That's the overarching term. Grief is what happens to you. Now, this is the fun piece. You don't get to choose what it looks like. Grief just comes, and it comes to each of us differently, but it just overwhelms us, and you do not control grief. That's what most people come to me want. Help me stop what this is doing. I don't like crying. I don't like not being able to sleep. I don't like the way I'm feeling. That's grief. And you can't control grief the way you want to. The only control we have is the third term called mourning. And mourning is our ability to express outwardly what grief is doing to us inwardly. So if I find a way to express what grief is doing, that's mourning. So bereavement, grief is what happens to you. You don't get to choose. Our choice comes in what do we do with that grief? How do I mourn, express, and honor that grief? So having just kind of that in play in your mind, that's what I understand those terms to mean and how I'm going to address this. We all recognize that we have never really learned about this thing. Isn't it amazing? Every one of us is going to experience multiple grief in our life. But where do we ever get a chance to talk about it? That's why I'm so glad you arranged for this. This is so important to be able to talk about it. Because where else do we get a chance to do that? I don't know about you, but I never learned about it in school. I really did finish school. But I never heard about grief in elementary school or in high school. I didn't hear about it in my university. The only time I heard about it was when I chose to do graduate studies in the field. And I'm sure that's true with you. And even you who are nurses, the training you got in grief was probably Kubler-Ross, 5 stages, and that was it. We never get a chance to talk about this. And so if we never get a chance to talk about it, then how do we know what to do with it? And that's what's so frustrating, is that none of us know whether this is something normal or this is something I should be afraid of. Grief happens to us. Now, just because we haven't learned about it formally doesn't mean we haven't found a way to deal with it. So let me tell you some of the ways that I've heard and experienced while sitting with hundreds and thousands of people in their grief. So one of the ways we've learned to deal with grief is replacement. If something breaks, I'll just get another one. I hate buying computers and equipment like that. I go to the store and I pay this exorbitant amount of money, and before I get to the cashier, the salesman says, "Oh, do you want to buy the warranty on that?" I said, "What, you're going to tell me it's going to break?" "Oh yeah, it'll break. But when it does, you just bring it in, we'll give you a new one." And so much of our life is based on that. If something breaks, is not right, well, I'll get a new one. And we've all experienced that. We do that with kids. A pet dies, and the kids are just unconsolable. And what do we say to them often? "It's okay. We'll go down and get you another dog, another cat, another gerbil." But you can't replace people. You can't replace pets either, by the way. But you can't replace people. But there are people who try that. Another way we've learned is, I hear this one a lot, I'm just being strong. I'm just going to be strong. If being strong means that you cannot be true to yourself outwardly, the way things are inwardly, I don't call that strength. Now, I know we have to do things. We have to carry on. We have to live. But you do not help grief by trying to be strong. Another one is, well, you know what? If you're going to, and how many of you heard this as a kid growing up? You know what? If you're going to cry, nobody wants to see you cry. Go to your room. Do it somewhere else. I had a teacher who, a parent asked me to go and talk to the school and the teacher because their child, he was in grade 1, just went into grade 1. His mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I worked with her, and she died in June. And so this little fella was going into grade 1, and I worked with him and his dad, got him all ready to go back to school. He went back to school in September. Things went really well. Came Christmas, things went well. I worked with him over Christmas. Never heard from him after Christmas until the first week of May. And all of a sudden I get this panic call. "Can you talk to my son?" So what happened was, as you can imagine, he goes into school on the first week of May, and the teacher's all excited and said, "Today, kids, we're going to make Mother's Day cards." And my little friend put his head down on the desk and started to cry. And the teacher, not knowing what to do, being uncomfortable, not knowing about grief, goes and gets him, takes him out in the hall and says, "Here, there's a room down here where you can sit for a while," and leaves him alone. When I talked to the teacher, she said, well, I didn't know what to do. I said, what do you think would have happened if you would have said to that class, David's mom died last year, and he's got to make a Mother's Day card, but his mom's not here. What do you think the class would do? What do you think a class of grade 1 children would do for David? Pardon me? They would go and give him a big hug. I guarantee you they would. They would go around, they would hug him, they would tell him they're sorry. We're afraid as adults. And people say to me all the time, I'm crying. When I cry, I can't be out in the open. I don't want people to see me crying. Because that's the message we think. I got to do this alone. Somehow I'm weak if I don't do it alone. Another one I hear is keep busy. That one's another big. I just need to keep busy. Keep busy, keep busy, keep busy. You can keep busy. Distraction's important, but believe me, you can keep busy, and 10 years later, when you face your grief, it's right there the same as it was. Keeping busy does not deal with the reality of our loss. Of course, the other one I hear is just give it time. Time by itself does not heal grief, believe me. So let's say, for instance, that I walked out here tonight, tripped on the curb, fell, which I won't, I promise, broke my arm, my bone was sticking out really bad. So off to the hospital, I go to the hospital, and they look at it and they say, well, that's a bad break. Just give it 6 weeks, it'll be okay. You know what 6 weeks would do if nothing was done to that arm. But if they did that and they looked at it and they said, okay, we got to set that bone, we'll put a cast on it, we'll get it set, there's the cast. You know what? 6 to 8 weeks, we'll take the cast off, your arm will be fine. And that's true. Time by itself does nothing. Time plus something, plus what we bring into that, makes all the difference. So while we haven't really talked about how to deal with grief, we've all learned about it in some way, but the ways in which we've learned it have not really been that helpful. So what do we do? How do we deal with this? Well, very simply, I want you to realize that, as I come back to, grief is a normal response. It's what we get. What do we do? And I'm going to shorten this because I really want to hear from your questions. What do we do when we find ourselves in that grief? What do we do when someone we love deeply, it dies? Well, there's several things. First of all, we have to honor that and recognize it for what it is and give it space. The truth is that people think that we get over grief very quickly. People want to get over grief very quickly. I had a dear lady who came to see me. I was telling the staff, she was in her 80s. Her kids, and when she came to see me, I said, so what's brought you here? Well, my wife died, and my kids think I need help because I can't stop crying. I said, well, how long were you married? 61 years. And when did he die? Well, he died a month ago. So I said, do you really believe that 61 years of life can be over in 4 weeks? Does he not deserve a little more time than that? Is he that worthless that 4 weeks is all you're prepared to give? Grief takes time. Grief changes our life. Death changes our life. And grief has two components to it. The component of what happened, and I have to deal with that, what that death looked like, how it happened, all of those pieces. But then the other part of grief is, what now? How am I going to live? How does this impact where I'm going? How am I going to live? How am I going to do this? And part of that work of grief is not just to deal with the death itself, but it's to find life again. And believe me, you will. I believe that with all my heart, that you will find your way and you will find life. You will find joy, even although at the moment you don't believe you would ever do that again. You will. But it's not going to happen in 4 weeks. It's not going to happen in 6 weeks. It's not going to happen probably in 1 year. This is a process. So what do you do to help that process for yourself? Well, two things. One, honor it, accept it what it is, keep memory alive with that person. I don't care, you can talk to them. I'm happy with that one. I think that's a good one. Keep memory alive, look at pictures, talk about them, honor them. Surround yourself with a support system. Now, there are three categories in your support system. I'll tell you really quickly. First one is you all need a listener. You all need somebody who, when things are getting really rough, you can pick up the phone and say, listen, I just need to have a coffee and a tea and talk to you. And they'll be right there. Now, the key with a listener is they're going to listen, not try to fix you. You don't want somebody telling you what to do. You need somebody to listen to you. These are the hardest people to find. And sometimes those listeners are hospice volunteers. I understand that, because they're very hard to find in our own circle. But if it's a hospice volunteer or staff, great. Who is it that will give you the space to talk about what's going on? The second kind of people you need in your support system are what I call doers. Those are the people who don't really want to listen to you. But if you need something done, they're on it. If you say, you know what, I need to pick up some groceries, but I just can't face going to the grocery store. Okay, just give me the list. I'll go and do it for you. But don't ask a doer to listen to me. That's not what they're good at. And then the third category is what I call the party people. Grief needs distraction. We all do. We can't live in it 24/7. These are the people who don't want to listen to your problem or the issues of grief, and they really aren't doers. They don't have time to do things for you. But they're going to call you up and say, hey, I'm going to the movies tonight. Do you want to come along? We'll have a laugh. And that's actually a good thing in grief, believe me. Not because it fixes grief, but it gives us moments where we find ourselves out of that heaviness. And that's not a bad thing. So surround yourself with a support system that has all of those components to it. But the biggest thing I can say to you is be compassionate with yourself. Acknowledge this is just grief. This is grief. It will change, but not now. And grief is unique to every one of us. We're not all going to experience it the same way. It affects us in so many different ways, physically, emotionally, spiritually, socially. It changes that. I had one of my clients, I remember so clearly, he said to me, since my wife died, I've had to throw out my address book and start a new one. And the reason is that so many of their friends were based on couples activities. Even although they kept saying, oh, we want you to be there, it didn't work for him. Or a lot of the friends were friends because of his wife's connection, not necessarily his. And so and then some of their friends didn't know what to do with them, so they just kind of moved away. But he found new ones. He found people he could connect with. He found others who were there, who would listen, who accepted him for who he was. So sometimes socially, grief is one of the hardest things. We have to change the way in which we operate in this world sometimes. But those are all the challenges of grief. But I want to be hopeful to you. It's not the end. No matter how you feel like I am never going to be different than how I feel at the moment, that's not true. You will find your way if you will compassionately allow yourself to experience the loss and to honor it in a good way, that you will surround yourself with a support system that allows you to do what you need to do and be who you need to be in those moments. And then find yourself with whatever you need to build life again that's changed, and yet there are pieces that are the same, but there's a huge piece that's not. So grief, I could talk for hours on grief, as you could tell. That's one of the huge pieces that come into our life. And I want you to ask questions. I think the better piece of this is I want to hear your questions about it, and then I can respond. But the other, just let me, before I leave grief, let me just also touch on the whole area of a life-threatening diagnosis. And again, I spent a great deal of my time in the palliative side, working with individuals and families who have received a life-threatening illness and who are on that journey towards their dying. They are living until they die. That's the focus. Palliative care means life. It's about living. Palliative care isn't about death. Palliative care is about living. It's about helping you to live the best you can until that moment of your death. And so it focuses on how do we live well despite what we're experiencing. So when you do face that initial life-threatening diagnosis, you get that call from the doctor's office, you get that call in after your scan or something, and you hear those words, that big C word, for instance. What's that do to you? Well, it changes everything. Life, and I tell people, life gets defined as pre and post. Before you heard that word and that news, and after you hear that word and that news. And there is an initial shock that just sends us crazy in our minds, in our thoughts, and our brain automatically goes all the way down to the end and to the worst scenario. So our first task is to deal with the shock and the trauma and realize, just a minute here, let's just pause and find ourselves some grounding that allows us to deal with what's happening. Two other things I'll just say before we ask for questions. One is that very few people deal with this on their own. In other words, there is a family connection, there are friends connections that are all impacted by those words. And the challenge is that your family may have different ideas about this than you do. And so sometimes we experience the conflict of the next steps because everybody's got different opinions. And that's a challenge. It's also not uncommon. So again, finding the help that you need, and hospice can do that, to navigate some of those challenges with family and friends, to say, okay, what are the options? What am I going to do? But the biggest thing that I like to share with people who have just experienced that is to say this, because immediately they've lost control of life. They have lost control of their own life. They feel that. And the medical world takes over. And all of a sudden, you're in a whole new world. It's telling you what you can do and what you should do and what you can't do and how long you've got and all those pieces. And it just drives you crazy. So here's what I really encourage people. What is it that you know is the next step? I don't care about down the road. I need to know, what is your decision about the next step? Well, I just got the news from the doctor. The doctor said my next step, I've got to go in next week, have another scan, and then I've got to see an oncologist. I said, good. Then that's all you need to deal with right now. It's not about what's on afterwards. It's not about what treatment is going to be there. It's about, this is what I know I need to do, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go have a scan. I'm going to see the oncologist. And whatever the oncologist tells me, then I have another step. Okay, the oncologist has offered a variety of treatments. So what am I going to do? And I'm not going to worry about what's at the end of those treatments. I just need to know the next step. And we call that the staying in the moment is the ability to deal with what it is I can control and not focus on what I can't control. Now, I know the brain doesn't work quite that way, that it's always trying to go down the road. And that's where, again, you can find help from hospice. Sometimes some good meditative help, sometimes some grounding, some exercises to help when in the middle of the night when you wake up, and that's where your mind starts to go down the road. How do we deal with those things? Find some help with it, because the only control you have is the next step. And we keep doing one step at a time until there are no more steps. But that could be a long time away. And I'm not worried about that length of time. I'm worried about, can I do what I need to do in order to get to the next place? So life throws these things at us, and it feels like I'm totally out of control. What do I do? I didn't plan this. Somebody I loved, if I had $1 for every time I heard the story of couples who said, we were waiting to retirement to travel, and my husband just retired, and then he got diagnosed with cancer, and now we can't go anywhere. our life plans, we call it a worldview. We all have it, the way things are supposed to operate. And suddenly something happens that shatters that. And what we are called to do is to rebuild life again in a new way, in a new worldview, unfortunately without that person physically with us. But that doesn't mean they're not with us and that we don't find a way to bring them with us. We do that. But that's the other pieces of this work that we can do. And then in the palliative side, one step at a time. What can I control next? And that's where I stay. Okay, I've done enough talking. As I say, I could talk all night to you. But I'd rather hear some of your questions. And again, there's no judgment here. There's no stupid question. And I don't claim to have all the answers, but let's dialogue about it, and I'm happy to do that.
If I can actually, I'm going to start us off just to warm us up. I met David yesterday. We had dinner together and we were talking, and it brought back what we discussed yesterday about your grade 1 class. I needed them. I don't know where they were, but I needed them. It was the year 2000. It was my family's year from hell. My father had died in hospice in June, and I had a late-term pregnancy loss in October. And I remember, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks after all of this came crashing down on us, I had to take the boys to the arena. I have 3 sons. They had to play hockey. So I took them in, and David, I remember walking in the arena and every single head turned away.
Yeah.
And I know they didn't mean it. Like, I know they just didn't have the words. They couldn't find the comfort that I needed. I needed those grade 1s. I needed a hug.
Yeah.
I needed to talk about it.
Yeah.
How do we, first of all, me as the grieving individual, but also as those who are in our lives, when we interact with people that have had a loss, what do you tell them?
And that's a great comment, and you're absolutely right, Debbie. And you feel that. Every person that turns away, you see that. 2 things. The person who's grieving, so what I say to them is, you have to be honest with your family about what you need. So most people say to me, well, I didn't know what to say because I didn't want to upset them. That's the normal thing I hear. And my response is, there's absolutely nothing you could say that's going to upset them more than they already are. Like, how much more upset can you get than somebody you love dying? So the grieving person, please be honest with your family and say, here's what I'd like. I'd like to keep talking about him. I'd like you to use his name. I'd like you to ask me. Now, don't ask me how I am, because I don't know how I am. So what I ask people is, how are you today? I add the word today. You know the difference there? How are you? People just slough that off. I never get an answer. But if I say to them, how are you today, right now? They will suddenly say, well, you know what? I'm feeling a little better than I did yesterday, or I'm feeling a little more sad at the moment. But somehow helping them to know it's okay to ask me, but not ask me, oh, how are you, in a way that's worrisome, but genuinely caring. So for a griever, the best you can do is be honest with your family. Say, it's all right, you can use his name, and if I cry, it's okay. You didn't upset me. All you did was gave me a chance to express my upsetness. And it's not your fault, and it's not a problem. It's actually good. For other people, that speaks more about our own fear of death and dying and grief than it does about the experience. So for all of us, what do we learn what are things we can say to people who are grieving? And sorry for your loss doesn't cut it. That kind of, it just kind of rolls off, right? I think sometimes it's being honest. I'm sorry, I can't even imagine. I don't know what to say to you. But please know I'm thinking of you. Avoid the platitudes. Avoid well, he's in a better place now. No, he's not in a better place now. A better place is right here with me. some of the things we say to people, we're trying to make them feel better so we feel better. But let's be honest, and if you need to say to them, I can't even imagine what this is like for you, but I want you to know I'm thinking of you. Or if there's, and then the third thing is not just saying it, but being practical about it. So, you know, is there anything I can, even that, is there anything I can do? They're going to probably say no, because their mind isn't thinking. Much better to say, you know, I know you like, I really know you love spaghetti, and is it okay if I bring over some spaghetti tomorrow night? Don't just offer something out of the blue, like, oh, I'll bring you a casserole, because they're going to put it in the freezer. I had one lady say, I got to go buy another freezer for all the casseroles I've got. People mean well, that's true. I encourage people, find out what they like, or what it is they're eating these days, which is probably minimal, and then respond that way. Is it okay if I bring over that for you tomorrow night? So ask yourself, I am so glad you're all here. But so I'm kind of preaching to the choir. But talk to your family and friends and say, how comfortable are you around people who are grieving? Yeah. What do you find hard about it? Get them to answer that question for you. Like, what's really tough when you're with somebody who's just had somebody die? And I think you'll discover that it's more about, and again, because we've never had the chance to talk about this, we don't know what to say, and we're afraid of saying the wrong thing. And so you end up saying nothing or turning away, which is much more hurtful. So be honest. Say, I don't know what to say. I'm at loss. How can I ever understand what happens when a child dies? I don't know what to say to a parent other than, I can't imagine, and I'm sorry, and I'm thinking of you. So sorry, long answer.
No, perfect, thank you. I don't think I handled it well. I don't think I went back to the arena for a few more weeks, to be honest. It was hard. It was so hard. I felt very alone. I just want to mention, so we are taping, we're recording this, we're going to have it on our website for those who aren't here, but the camera is actually zoomed just right in on David, okay? So all of you, you do not need to worry. He told me he had a radio face, but you know what?
I have a face for radio, that's it.
He's our local star. So just keep in mind that you will not be on camera. We can hear your voice, and if you do not have, if you can write down your question, and I will take it for you. Is there anyone that wants to have something discussed or talked about, or any brave souls out there that's got something they need a little bit of help with? Oh. Oh, sorry. No.
Hi, this is just a question around things that happened during COVID, where quite a lot of people lost a loved one and were not able to see them when they died.
Right.
And they carry a lot of anger and resentment at the medical system, and it's really hard to get past.
Yeah.
How do you help?
Yeah.
What do you do with that?
Yeah. Thank
What
you.
do they do with that?
Thank you. That's a great comment, and it's so true. And so many people, my heart goes out to them, because it is the worst thing not to be able to be present at that most, because you only get one chance. You only get one chance. And to be told you can't be there is just, it's devastating, and we can never undo that. What we are, and what we're dealing with in part for the first while is actually a specific type of grief. We call it ambiguous grief. And ambiguous grief is where the person is not present physically, but they are psychologically. So we can't be with them. They told us they died. We don't know that. There's part of grief that needs to know that death actually happened. So there's a lot of, that's why if the person is missing, let's say, people will not accept death until that person can be found, or somehow proof of that. So in COVID, you have a microcosm of that same ambiguous loss, where people were told, oh, your partner died, but you can't see him. And we're living with that reality that, you know, in our hearts, in our life, they're there, but why can't I see them? I need to see them in order to confirm that death. So it is an extra layer to grief. And I hope we don't have to deal with that again. Now, I know hospice here opened during COVID. Hospice in Peterborough had been open for 3 years prior to COVID. And we were able to have a different standard than the hospital. So we did allow immediate family, 2 at a time, to be present with a person at death. And whereas the hospital wouldn't allow anybody. So we were able to provide that difference. But I also have worked with many and have a good friend who experienced that very same thing. So my answer is, we do have to work it through. Don't just push it off and say it's not important. It is very important. So one of the questions that I would work with is that idea, what would you have done had you been able to be there? What is it that you're grieving the loss of? And often it is, well, they died alone. They didn't have me there. Or I wanted to be there, not just for his sake, but my sake, to have that sense of, and I'll use the word closure, there is no closure, but that's often how people describe that. And what they mean is, I know death happened. So it takes some time to work through, so what is it? So how can we do that now? How do we can't go back and recreate that, but let's talk for a moment. And what would your husband, so I'll use a husband and wife situation. That's my experience that I'm working with. So would your husband have, how would he have responded to that? Or what do you think he would have needed out of that? So can we tell him that we're sorry that we couldn't be there? Can we write him a letter and let's go read it at his grave? These are just options. I would never tell people what to do. I'm saying, can we find a way? It's never going to be what we wanted. It's never going to be enough of what we lost. But can we find a way to express our own feelings of sadness and sorrow that we couldn't do what we wanted to do, and find a way to express that?
Okay, good.
But it's a great question because it adds a whole layer to the grief that needs to be paid attention to. So thank you. And I'm going to say this carefully. I hope hospitals have learned something. Long-term care, it's not just hospital, long-term care. I do a lot of work with long-term care. And I have been so angry and so upset at how people died in COVID in long-term care in isolation on their own. It's not what we as a society, it's not what we do as a human being. So my hope is we don't have to do that again, or we have learned enough and we can be vocal enough not to allow that to happen that way again. But oh my gosh, it's crushing, yeah.
David, can I just mention, you mentioned about hospice. We opened during COVID, and a strategy I learned from one of our nurses, you take the screen off the window and you let the daughters climb in and jump into bed with their mom. I'm not saying that anybody in particular may have done that, but that's what hospice is all about. And no one dies alone. And we had infection control under control. But how do you tell 5 kids that only 2 of them get to say goodbye, right? We need to, and as we are hoping today is, let's teach those long-term care homes. Let's teach the hospitals. Yeah. Because no nurse or PSW goes into this field to have somebody die alone. It's our job to continue these conversations and to share what we learn within hospice so that they can do better,
Right.
right?
Yeah, and that's part of this. I love the dialogues. That's part of what we need to do. We need to talk about this. We need to have these conversations. What is it that we need to be saying about death and dying? Because we not only are you all going to have somebody you love do it, you're going to do it. And I'm going to do it. So what's important to me? That's why, if you talk about the advanced care planning, having those, what's important to you at your own dying? What is important, if possible? What are the things that you would like to be there? Who do you want there? Where do you want it to be? But those are all the dialogue that we need to have constantly. Other questions? Yeah, what's going on with grief that you'd like to know about?
I wonder if you could comment on anger in grieving. In grieving.
Okay. So usually anger comes about is because of what we all have learned about grief, and that being the 5 stages, and anger being one of those stages. I'll say this carefully, but quickly, there are no stages to grief. It's not linear. You don't do this, and then you're okay. Grief is like up and down, back and forth. I tell people it's like being strapped to the front car of a roller coaster. Hang on. But anger is often present. But it's not a stage, and not everybody has anger. So, in my work, anger, I express it like this. Anger is the fire alarm. It's not the fire. Anger is expressing something else. And if we only focus on the anger, we're going to miss what the anger is about. So, normally in grief, when there's anger present, I will find things like guilt. I will find things like regret. I will find things like the person left me in a bad state. There's all kinds of things that happen that find their expression in anger. You think about children. So often when kids don't know what to do with their emotions, it comes out in behavioral or anger. They yell. They're yelling. It's not about the yelling, and we all don't want them to yell. But we need to know what that yelling is about. And often it's about something they don't know how to express. They don't have the words yet to weigh. We don't have the words for grief. I don't know how to express how I feel when the person I love the most has died. I'm at loss. So what do I do if I don't have words to adequately express? Often I express anger. So rather than two things, rather than focusing on the anger, I will use that as a piece to say, okay, well, what's that anger about? Let's get to where we really need to go. And then work on that piece of it, which I find once people can express, I really feel guilty because, I should have done this, or he should have done that for me. And we get to talk about that, then the anger leaves. So anger is not a stage, but it is often present. And when it is present for me, it's the fire alarm. It's not the fire. So we need to trace it back to find out what's really going on there.
Okay, next question, third question. Yes.
My partner had a very quick death, 2 weeks from when he was diagnosed to when he died.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to say to him in that period of time. It wasn't even 14 days. I mean, part of it he wasn't here. And people said, don't cry in front of him. I didn't think that was correct. And I did cry in front of him because he needed to know I was upset. But I didn't know what to say.
Yeah. And those are because we never learn what to say, right? How do we say? What is it that we want to say? So, and that's a very hard one when you have such a quick, short period between diagnosis and death. Here's what if I'd have had a chance to talk to you, I would have encouraged you to talk to him about your life. Hey, honey, remember the time we did that vacation? Tell the stories of your life together. And often we're afraid, and that's where I come back to, I don't want to upset him. That's why he didn't want to cry. Believe me, he's more upset than you are. So we're never going to upset him more. What we can do is give him a chance to talk about his life. And one of the keys about people coming up to end of life is we talk about life rehearsal. We talk about going over things that are important, that finding meaning in my life. So, hey, even having the conversation around, do you have children? So saying, you know, you did a great job in raising them, or something you can say honestly, or talking about, you know, what you are grateful for him, and using those, because people need to know their life mattered. So the telling of stories and the rehearsing of life is one way in which we encounter and engage that. But what you are having to deal with in grief is this, oh my gosh, you were responsible for 2 weeks trying to make it the best you can, and then all of a sudden he dies, and now what? And it all comes out, right? It's like the dam bursts. Yeah. And I would encourage you to still do that. Go over your life together. Talk to him. It's okay. Yeah. And just find ways to continue to honor. This is going to take a long time, but a good time. And you will find it. I promise you will. But boy, it's got up and downs, doesn't it? Like one day you think, okay, you wake up and you think, okay, it's not a bad day. And then an hour later, wham. I don't know if I can keep doing this. That's when you surround yourself with people, not to fix you, because there is nothing wrong with you. You are feeling exactly like you should, and it hurts like hell. Sorry. Yeah.
My son-in-law died in.
I'm sorry. I'm.
My son-in-law died in August,
Okay.
and my daughter said to me about 6 weeks later, "Mama, I'm not always worried, thinking about it. I'm already sensing her feeling of guilt that she should be still
Right.
in that state."
Right.
And I reassured her and all that, but I think it's something that guilt that we should be doing some way of
Right.
our bereavement work should not include getting over it.
Right. So I would probably say to her, how do you think you should be grieving? What is it that you're not doing you think you should be doing? And the truth is, that's not true. Not everybody, believe me, not everybody needs to cry. I've had people come private say, you need to talk to my sister because they're not crying. I say, and what's that mean? Well, it means they're not grieving. I said, how do you know that? There's different ways to do this, and not everybody's going to feel it the same way. Plus, it's only been how long? How many months? You said August? So it's way too early. How does she know how she's going to feel 6 months from now? That's when she might feel that expression. So the most important thing is grief is all unique. Not everybody's going to feel it the same way. And if you're not feeling it in sadness, it doesn't mean you're not grieving. And the guilt doesn't help, because then we take on the guilt that I'm doing something wrong with my grief. And that's just not true. Being honest, being open. I've had people who have had lost somebody very close to them, just like your daughter-in-law, that feel like, how come I'm not doing as badly as some of my other friends are doing about this loss? It doesn't mean you're not grieving. There's another way we can look at it. We talk about instrumental grief and intuitive grief. So intuitive grief is what we normally think of: crying, sadness, can't sleep, all those things. That's what we normally think of. Intuitive grief. Instrumental grief, we do our grieving by doing things. So I had a gentleman who his wife died, and the next week he went home and completely painted the whole house, inside and out. And his family came to me and said, hey, you got to talk to my dad. He's gone crazy. He's painting. He's not grieving. I said, well, I think he is, but let me talk to him. So Dad comes in, and Dad says, I miss her every breath I take, but I'm out there doing the painting, and I'm doing my grieving while I'm doing it. I don't need to be crying. I'm working. I'm getting lots done, and I'm thinking about her every minute. So grief sometimes happens when we do things, not just how we feel about things. And it's okay. So encouraging her that it's all right, there's nothing wrong, and that guilt is, so when people tell me about feeling guilty, I ask them, whose voice is that? Whose voice are you listening to that's making you feel guilty? And once we can identify where that voice is, maybe we can do something about it. You don't have to listen to that voice. You need to do what you feel you need to do right now.
David, how do you know when the grief moves beyond something that we can cope with on our own? I think I'm looking around the room
Right.
here. There's a lot of our bereavement volunteers. There's kitchen volunteers here, our own team. How do you know that when you're sitting with someone, or even for your own self, where this is beyond, I hate to use the word normal, but the normal grief process? How do you know when it's deeper than that and you need more help?
Well, even normal grief, I think, has value. So what I've come to learn is that there's value in being with other people who are experiencing similar things. So one of the great values of groups, of grief group, for instance, is that you're suddenly with people who also are experiencing grief. Now, we can't start comparing because it doesn't matter how bad their loss is. Yours is bad as anybody's. But just being together is helpful to know, okay, somebody else is like me. Oh, somebody just talked about that. I felt that. So it doesn't have to be pathological in order to attend a grief group. But the other pieces I would look for is, do you have a good support system that's allowing you to do what you need to do? Do you feel you are being supported well? You may not, because families, as good as families can be, they're not always the best support. So sometimes we need an outside support. So if I feel like, I just feel like I'm not sure what I'm doing, or I feel like I need just some direction, I need to know that I'm okay, then I think those are very valid reasons to say, look, can I talk to somebody? Can I join a group? What I don't want you to think is that there's something wrong with you that needs to get fixed. Even complicated grief isn't something wrong with you. It just means the grief's complicated. So we got to do a little more work on it. But it's not your fault. And you didn't do anything to cause it. So if we feel like, and I would say, if 6 months down the road you're saying, I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere in this thing. I feel like now, if you came to see me, I would say, I'm not worried about that, but I know you are. So that would be a place, maybe you can sit in a group and understand other people are saying the same thing, and that could be helpful to you. So I think the resources at hospice, whether it's volunteers or whether it's staff or whether it's the groups, I think those are great resources that you can take advantage of, not because you think you're doing it wrong, but just because this is a place for me to find other people in the same situation, although different death experiences, that I can connect with. And you can find some deep connections there. So I really would encourage that.
Questions? Oh, there we go.
And while you're doing that, there's one story I want to tell about anger I forgot about. I was going to tell, but I'll tell it in a minute when I finish this. Remind me if I forget, because I'm at that age where I forget everything.
Hi, I thought I was doing really well. My husband died in April, and a pity party. And my daughter said, "Who was there?" I said, "Just me." I just wondered, it just dawned on me that I think I was fooling myself for the last 6 months that I was fine. And my husband kept telling me that before he died, you're going to be just fine. And I thought, if he tells me that one more time, I'm going to kill him.
Exactly. Exactly.
He was right, because I have some really good friends all around here. Monday night, I lost it. So I think I'm ready to sign up for something.
You know the ladies all around the table. You know where you come, right?
Right.
Okay.
And I think there's you talk about a pity party. I wouldn't call it that. I would say you're facing the reality of what this means. So when a person dies, it's not just the person who dies. It's everything that they mean to us that dies. So it's the role they play in our life. It's who they are. It's all of those things. And as I said to you, grief is both facing the death, but it's also, how am I going to live now? What's life look like? So rather than, I would be a little more compassionate and say, I don't think that's a pity party. I think you are expressing honestly what you believe. How am I going to do this? How am I even going to survive? How am I going to live? And those are normal questions that we ask in grief. And what you've come to discover day by day, and that's what I encourage people, you take this, you wake up tomorrow and you say, okay, I'm here, I think I can do today. So all I'm going to do is today. And you get through that day. And then the next day you say, okay, I made yesterday. And today I'm here again, I got my feet in the floor, I think I can do today. And if the next day you say, this is overwhelming, I don't think I can get out of bed, I think I need to stay here, stay there. Because then tomorrow you have another choice. It's up and down and back and forth. And there's some days where you're going to have to stay in bed. And everybody's going to be worried about you, but I'm not. Because tomorrow you'll get up. And we'll find our way in there. Yeah. Can I tell my anger story? I told you guys, it's one of my favorites around the stages of anger. So when I was in private practice, I had this gentleman come to see me. He was in his 40s. His father died. And so his first session with me. So I said to him, introduced myself, said, so what brings you here today? He said, well, my father died a month ago and I'm not grieving. I said, well, what makes you think you're not grieving? Well, I haven't been angry yet. I said, well, I've got good news and bad news. I said, the good news is you don't have to be angry. There's no stage and many people aren't angry. You don't have to be angry. The bad news is that just cost you $150. And I said, I bet you're angry now. I only had one session with him.
So David, I have a question. I'm asking this for a friend. Again, getting kind of so personal as people experience grief in different ways that may be foreign to us. How do you cope, or how do you help people who are trying to cope when the loved one is resorting to alcohol?
Resorting to?
Alcohol.
Okay.
Numbing, right? Just they don't want to think. You end up, you're in the emerge room and the doctor says, you know what? She just had a loss.
Right.
This is how she copes.
Right.
And you struggle with that person's ability, even though you know in your heart that you want to be supportive.
Right.
How do you deal with
Well, and it's more prevalent than you think. And let me tell you another scenario of how that same thing comes about. So many clients that I see, one of the things I'll ask them is, how are you sleeping? Because I know what they're going to say. Well, I'm not sleeping very well. I wake up in the middle of the night and then I don't get to sleep. But they tell me, it's okay, I went to my doctor and I got some sleeping pills, or I got lorazepam, and it's helped me sleep. That's a numbing agent. Here's the truth. If somebody you love dies, chances are you're not going to sleep well for a while. Chances are you're going to wake up at 2 in the morning. You're going to go to sleep at 11:30. You're going to be wide awake at 2 in the morning, and your brain's going to be on overload. Get up. Do something mindless. Cry. Look at pictures. Watch TV. 4 o'clock, you're tired again. Go back to bed. We don't like what grief does to us. That's what I'm saying. So alcohol is the same thing. We're trying to fix or numb what grief is doing because we think it's not healthy or it's wrong. So part of the first piece of helping is education, saying, look, so I know drinking, it helps you forget. But let me tell you something. You can drink for the next 10 years, and the moment you stop, you're going to remember. So why don't we deal with this differently? Why don't we find a way to deal with it? And again, part of it is fear. What are you afraid of? Well, I'm afraid if I start crying, I'm never going to stop. Well, guess what? You will. Or I'm afraid that I'm afraid of the pain that I can't face it. What can we do to help you face that pain, knowing that you will make it? So when a person resorts to either pharmaceutical or drugs or alcohol, we really do have to address that in a way that doesn't come with condemnation or judgment. I understand why people do that. So let's begin by compassionately offering them an alternative. If you would like to find a different way to deal with the fear that you have around your grief, we can help with that. If you're sleeping, by the way, I've just read a fascinating study on long-term use of lorazepam, and it actually increases depression, this new pharmaceutical piece. But I say to people, yeah, you're not going to sleep, but it's okay. You know what? If you don't sleep at night, if you only get 3 or 4 hours, take a nap during the day. Go lay down. Go sleep for an hour. It's okay. It will get back into rhythm. I promise. But sleep disruption, somatic disruption, eating disruption are all part of what grief does to us. And we can either fight that or can find a way to mourn it. And mourning it is by doing healthy things to express what this is. Hey, I'm not sleeping. I'm really having trouble, but I think I'm going to find a way to take a nap during the day. And I'm going to honor my person who's died by allowing them to be in my thoughts. I'm just going to sleep when I can and not worry about not sleeping all the time. And I guarantee you that give it a few weeks, might take a month, might take a month and a half, it will change. But alcohol and medication, drugs, or even prescription drugs, I think we have to confront the fact that they are not an answer to grief. Sometimes people need a prescription. I am not against that. Sometimes they need it simply to, if they've had history of anxieties and depression and they're already on medication, then we need to do that because they need to be in a little more grounded, common place where then they can address the grief healthily. But for most of us, we jump immediately to getting a sleeping pill because we're not sleeping. That's not going to help the grief. So can we find a different way to do it? Can we talk about it differently? And there's all kinds of meditative programs, and I know our hospice order offers meditation and things, tools you can use for yourself when you find yourself not sleeping. What can we do to help that piece? But it's a hard one to watch, Debbie, when somebody resorts to particularly a drug or alcohol to numb. But what they are doing is trying to numb grief. And believe me, you can't do it.
Question here.
David, what would you say to people that are struggling with the what ifs? The what ifs could be
Right.
what they did or didn't do,
Right.
what the hospital staff did or
Right.
didn't do,
Right.
The unknown of the death is still under investigation, those types of things.
And that one, and again, depending on the type of death or the manner of death, that question comes up a lot. So if there's been, as you mentioned, some issue at the hospital where it's unexpected and it suddenly happens, the what ifs come. If it was suicide, the what ifs come. If it was a type of death that, even cancer, So people say, what if it was the way I fed him food? What if it was the way he ate? What if we didn't eat healthy? And what if I didn't give him enough water? So the what ifs. So 2 things I say. First of all, when people start that, they immediately get shut down by family and friends. Oh, you don't say that. You can't say that. So immediately all of those things get shut. And I'm of the belief that we need to allow them to be expressed. Shutting them down doesn't solve it. So I allow them to say that. So what if? What if I'd gotten to the hospital sooner? What if I'd have paid attention that he wasn't feeling well and got him there sooner? Maybe he wouldn't have had a heart attack. I said, okay, is that true? Yeah. So, and I make a distinction between guilt and regret. Regret is, if I'd have known then what I know now, I would have done things differently. So I say to them, if you'd have known your husband was going to have a heart attack and you saw him in the morning, what would you have done? Oh, I'd have got him to the hospital. Okay, because you loved him. Yes, I loved him. I'd do anything for him, right? But you didn't know. That's called a regret. I wish I'd have known. And we all have them. Guilt is different. Guilt is, I knew, but I didn't care, and I didn't do anything about it. Now, I have worked with people with guilt, but most people I work with, it's the regrets and the what-ifs. So what I say to them is, here's the truth. The truth is you loved that person. You would have done anything for them. Had you known that they needed to get to the hospital sooner, you would have done anything. I can't change what happened, but you have to live with the reality knowing if I'd have known, I would have. And that's different than living with what if. Because none of us have the ability to know the future. And we make choices based on the best decision we can at the moment, which, looking back, we always wish we had more information. So helping separate that what if away from feeling guilt to accepting it as the reality of I'm human. I can't know the future. Had I known, I would have done anything to save him or her. So helping them to put that what ifs into a context of love and care, that I would have done that. Yeah, I love that.
Is it healthy? So you mentioned a little bit about the anger around maybe the healthcare when we talk about COVID and all of those things. Right. I usually, if someone's in my office, I'll say, have you written out a letter? Like, have you written out your concerns? Because oftentimes people can't change what they aren't aware of. Yeah. Is that therapeutic? Does that help people with that anger to physically do that? Or?
Well, very much. And if it's a legitimate anger they have, that there was definitely a mess up, then I really encourage them. Now, I caution them, because sometimes the first action they want is I'm going to sue them. And I don't say no, but I will caution them to say it's probably not going to go very far, not because you don't have a case, but you need to know the system. And secondly, I'm not sure you're going to feel any different at the end of it, even if you win. But there are some things we can do because they do need to be held to account. So I try to carefully, if they want to sue, that's their privilege. But I will also explore, there's other ways we can hold them to account. Whether or not they ever accept what you're saying, you need to tell them the truth. So I've done exactly what you say, Debbie. They have written a letter to the hospital administrators, to the proper ombudsman. I've had them write to the Ontario ombudsman. And here's the concern. Here's what happened. And I tell them, you have to be very specific in details, in what happened, and only say what happened, what you know to be true. Now, what does that usually get? And I say, you do that. If you want me to read it over, I will do that. But you need to send that in order to deal with what you have felt would be undone if you didn't do it. But I also caution them to say, if you're doing this expecting that they're going to come back and change things or offer you an apology, that's probably not going to happen. So we can't do this only because you're expecting to get what you want. We are doing it for the person who died, who can't have a voice, who needs to be heard about what happened. No matter what they say, you need to be honest about this.
Is it helpful if, for some people, you hear it all the time where I don't want this to happen to another family. Right. Does it give them comfort in their loss, knowing that their advocacy or their speaking up is somehow going to help someone else, that this won't happen to another family because I spoke up?
Well, I think that's another piece of it, is that they are doing that. But however, the truth is that that's just not possible. It'll still happen to another family, unfortunately. But I think what we can do is maybe change the system enough that it's not going to happen as often, or that people are going to think twice about certain things. So I do believe in that. I do believe that that's, for any number of reasons, can be a therapeutic tool. But I also am cautious about the expectations of what it is they're expecting back out of this, because that often adds another layer of disappointment and doesn't allow us to move on with the grief. The truth is, whether it's a judicial thing or it's something where there's a cause that needs to be corrected, we get, I'm not going to use the word stuck, we get stopped in grief at that point. And we feel like, until I get this thing resolved, that's my focus. And so you're so focused on that, and that it takes up all of your time. You're not allowing yourself to experience the grief in a way that's going to help you move on to where we need to be. So understanding that, yeah, okay, you want to write this letter, I think it's good. We do it, and hopefully it'll cause the hospital to stop and think twice about it, maybe save another patient. All of those things are good. But I also want to know what you're expecting back. And what if it doesn't happen? What if you get an answer back, thanks for your letter? What's that mean to you? Because then we're into a whole different piece. So I tread very carefully. It is a very important piece. I know that, and I've done it many, many, many times. But I also recognize that it doesn't automatically mean that it's going to be helpful.
Is she allowed to have a second question? There's the social worker from hospice. One more question, David.
Okay. I'm just wondering if you can share, if somebody's caught in what we would call maybe a grief burst. So you're out, maybe you're doing some shopping, maybe you're around the house, maybe you're driving, and whether it's something you saw, you heard, you smelled, or you thought of, and all of a sudden you're overwhelmed with emotion.
Right.
What's even just one thing that someone can do when they're caught up in those emotions to work through that?
Thank you. And so you call them grief bursts. I call them STUGs, S-T-U-G. Sudden, temporary, urge of grief. I want it to be a wave of grief, but it doesn't make a word. So it's a STUG, a sudden, temporary urge of grief. And exactly as you described, Sarah. You're in the grocery store, you're doing not too bad, you're pushing your cart down, you go past the pasta aisle, and you're looking at spaghetti, and you remember, my husband loved spaghetti, it was his favorite meal, and you lose it. You cry. You just look at your cart and you say, I can't do this. And you leave your cart and you walk out, and everybody's looking at you. Or you get up to the belt to put things on, and all of a sudden, this sudden temporary urge of grief, which can happen by anything, trigger that. And you just say, I can't do this, and you leave it right there, and you walk out, and everybody's looking at you and mad at you. So what do? Sudden temporary urge of grief, or grief burst. First of all, we accept it for what it is. If it's possible, go find a quiet place to be and cry. Do what you need to do. It'll only last a few minutes, trust me. You'll be overwhelmed. Do what you need to do. If it's crying, if it's just being quiet, just allow that to be. Find a place to do that. If you're at work and that happens, you should pre-warn your workmates to say, you know what, If you see me go to the bathroom, I'm okay. You don't have to come and see if I'm all right. Just, I'll be okay. And you just need to find a space to allow that to be. And it will pass. You'll find yourself taking a deep breath. And then I wouldn't suggest you go back in the grocery store. I suggest you get in the car and go to a different grocery store. But those stugs are with us, and they happen a lot soon after death. But they continue to happen for the rest of our life. But here's the difference. Eventually, they become something that's comforting. So, I was, my father, I had wonderful parents. And my dad died, he was 85 when he died in 2000. He was a big fisherman. He loved to fish. And I'm not so much a fisherman. My brother is, but I'm not. So anyway, but I was taking a walk by the river. We have a river and a lake in Peterborough. And I was walking down the river, just out for a walk, and there was a gentleman there who was in his 80s with a cap just like my dad used to wear, who was fishing. And all of a sudden I had a stug. I thought, oh my gosh, I miss you, Dad. You know, I really miss having conversations with you. But I wasn't crying, I wasn't overwhelmed. In fact, it was, you know, I'm glad I can have these memories. These memories are so great, and I love thinking about you. And I love the memories of you taking me fishing when I was a kid. And I ended up having this whole dialogue about my dad. But that was a stug, and that's been, 23 years later. So, but those happen constantly at first. Don't be afraid of them. You know what I tell people? It's just that person tapping you on the shoulder saying, hey, don't think you can carry on as if nothing happened here. Don't forget me. I'm right here. Don't you dare think you can just keep going as if this isn't something you need to pay attention to.
Hence the dragonfly in front of you, right? We often in hospice, this is our little special thing. We'll talk about that later, but they appear, dragonflies appear when angels are near. I can't tell you how many family members at Tompkins House will tell us, I was out in the shed and I was doing some work and there was the dragonfly on the chair. She's watching me to make sure I was still doing okay. It's something that's very interesting. So the stugs, I'm going to steal that. The other thing I'm going to steal from you, sir, is something you said this morning, which was profound for me. The value of vigil, you mentioned. And it perked me right up when you said it. And in the hospice world, we deal a lot with an expected death. We know that this person is eventually going to die. And it helps us, and we see it when families can sit around the table with photographs and they're enjoying those last moments together. Sometimes it's Wheel of Fortune, sometimes it's whatever. Everybody has a different way. What is the difference when we are dealing with people in their grief when it's not expected? So those death by suicides, those tragic losses, the accidental overdoses, and the murders that are happening. Like, we are a small community, but this is happening in our world. How do we as hospice family members help support other people when it's not an expected death?
Well, and before I get to it, that value of vigil is actually one episode in the podcast. So I handed out some cards about a podcast that I'm involved in with two of my colleagues. And we're into the second season. There's about 18 different podcasts. One of them there is on the value of vigil, where we talk about that. And I encourage you to look at that. But how do we deal? So here's every death, the way a person dies impacts the grief. It's not good or bad, it just is. It doesn't make it harder or easier, it makes it different. So somebody who has had, well, I'll tell you the story. Sorry, forgive my stories. I had a client who came to see me, and she was 32. This is in private practice. Her mom, she was an only child. Her dad died when she was young. Her mom was her rock. Her mom developed Alzheimer's and was institutionalized. She went to see her every day. Every day she visited her mom. Her mom, at the end, didn't even know her half the time, but she went anyway. Then her mom was diagnosed with cancer, an aggressive form of cancer, and this daughter had to watch her mom suffer through the cancer and the dementia until she died. And she said to me at the end of our session, she said to me, "I wish my mom had just been killed in a car accident. I wouldn't have had to go through that." My next client was, again, somebody who I had not, this is a first visit. It was a woman in her early 50s, late mid-50s. Her story was she had 2 daughters. Her and her husband split when their daughters were 14 and 17. The 17-year-old was okay. The 14-year-old took it hard, rebelled, ended up in drugs on the streets, and was totally absent from mom for 3 years. And at the age of 19, she got a hold of her mom. She was clean. She came out of rehab. She said, "Mom, I'd love to come and live with you and make life again. I'm dealt with my grief. I've got this." So she came home. Life was good. The other sister was married, had a child, a 4-year-old child. And it was the child's birthday. It was a Saturday. And they were at a cottage about 45 minutes outside of Peterborough. So mom and the daughter, the younger daughter now, who were just getting to know each other and getting along so well, were on their way to the cottage. And they both loved garage sales. They just loved doing garage sales. And on the way, they were early, and there was a garage sale. So they stopped, and they looked around the garage sale, and then they went back, and their car was on the other side of the highway. And Mom said to me, I don't know what happened. I guess she just didn't see the car because she stepped out onto the highway and was hit in front of her mom and was killed. But Mom said to me, "I wish my daughter had died of cancer because at least I would have had a chance to say goodbye." So, there is no right or easy way to die. Every death has different pieces. So somebody who dies through vigil, yeah, we get to say goodbye. We get to spend time. We get to say what we need to say. Somebody who dies suddenly, either through suicide or accidental overdose or murder, we don't get that chance to say goodbye, so we're left with all the things we wanted to say. So, is it harder? Not necessarily. It's different, and that's what I want to express to people. It's just that it's different, and we're going to have to do different things. So, one of the pieces in suicide, for instance, is that we have to work to begin with to understand, because they're not only what ifs, but they're going to ask the question, why did they do this? And again, that's a question that they often get shut down on, not with me. I say, yeah, we need to ask that question. Why do you think they did that? Because what I'm going to hear is often magical thinking. They're going to come up with ideas that just aren't true. So what we need to work with then is, okay, let me tell you what the research shows. Let me show you what goes through their mind. So some of it begins with that education to change the magical thinking in their mind about why people do what they did. Or if they died in a car accident suddenly, we have to work with, again, you didn't get to say goodbye. You didn't finish life the way you wanted to finish life. So we have to work on because we can still do it. We still finish life. It's just that we have to do it differently, that's all.
Is there benefit when we do group programs to have a variety of different people? Can they learn and benefit and support each other even though they've had a very different experience?
Yes and no.
Okay.
There are certain deaths that I think you need groups on your own. Suicide's one of them. And that's mainly because of the judgment that people have, unfortunately. And what can happen, what I've seen happen in a group, is there are people where they've been married for a long time and their husband died of cancer, and there's been mom in there whose son suicided, and that woman will say to her, how selfish was that of your son? My husband wanted to live, and your son took his own life. So what we have when we mix certain types of death is an opportunity for judgment that we don't need. So I think there are certain death types that need to be dealt with alone. Other types, grief, whether they died by cancer, they had ALS, whether they died, of old age, or whatever the cause was, maybe it was a medical reason. I start by saying, everybody died differently for different reasons perhaps, but here's the bottom line. On one level it matters, on the other level it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day they're not here. And it doesn't matter how they died, the truth is they're not here. So what do we do with that? How can we focus on that as opposed to how they died? But when it's suicide or murder or something like that, I don't think that's possible to mix.
Okay. Oh, we've got a question.
Can grief affect your physical
Oh.
body?
Thank you. It sure can. I've had people go to Emerge thinking they're having a heart attack. It's grief. So here's what happens in grief physically. Your whole body goes like this. So people have pain, physical pain, incredibly physical pain. People have their joints that flare. People have all kinds of, I've had people start tremors and their body is reacting. A lot of that we call the physical trauma of grief. So the body is very much impacted by grief. Now, not everybody feels it the same level, but absolutely. So we have to pay attention to that, but we also have to recognize what it is. So, somebody who's suddenly their chest is really heavy, I would say, yeah, go check it out, but my guess is it's probably grief, but I'm not the doctor here. So, but recognize that your body will take a huge toll because of grief. And you know what? Sometimes as we get older too, we don't recover physically the same way, and it can stay with us. Stress, that pain, that real turmoil, yeah, very, very physical. Thank you for that.
Any other questions? Yes?
I'm old too. It's past my bedtime.
I'm just still thinking back on you talking about, each grief being different. Is there any special or different or necessary response to people, for support for people who have one kind of complicated grief, in that the person who died was neglectful, abusive, where they've had
Yep.
a very, very hard relationship?
Right.
That's the question.
Thank you. That's a great question. And I'll answer it with a story. So I had a client come to see me. She was 29 years old. When she was 3 years old, her and her mom and her dad lived in Halifax. She was 3 years old. Her father physically, sexually abused her over a period of time. Mom found out about it. She went and reported him. He was convicted. He was sent to jail, prison. Mom said to the daughter, we're getting out of here. She moved to Ontario and set up in a community in Western Ontario. This girl said to me, there wasn't a day go by when I would wish my dad was dead. I just wished he would die. 3 weeks earlier than she saw me, and by the way, she was a professional. She had an administrative job at City Hall. She was way up there. 3 weeks previous, she got a phone call from a distant relative who told her that her father, after he was out of prison, moved out to Alberta, where he had been living, and that he just died. And she said, when I heard that he had died, I couldn't do anything. She couldn't go to work. She couldn't leave the house. She was just overwhelmed. And she said to me, why am I feeling this way? I hated him. I wanted him dead every day. So the reality of grief that we're working with there, two things. But one of them is, what she's really feeling is the grief over the fact that she would never be able to have the father that she deserved to have. We all deserve to have a father who loves us, who cares for us, who doesn't abuse us. She knew he wasn't that, but what death did was, even although she didn't want anymore, death was the final piece that said to her, you will never get what you hope you wanted, or what you thought you deserved, and you did deserve. So part of her grief was that deep feeling of grief over what she lost with her father's abusive life. And we had to work on that. The other piece is that no matter how bad somebody is, they're the only father you have. And that there is a piece of that grief that says, a part of me has died, and I feel it. Now, I think that's the minor piece, but it's there. So working with somebody in grief through a bad relationship that's there, we are often looking at grief that's tied to what they didn't get. And it's real and it's valid, and we need to. So once we examined that together, once we could explore that, she came to see that she wasn't crazy, that's okay, that what she was feeling was a normal response to what she experienced. It allowed her to live again. So we have to be careful around the judgment piece, but we also have to acknowledge that the grief will be present even if the person has been abusive. But what is it we're grieving is the key. Yeah, good question though. Yeah,
I
thank you.
think it's one of the things I think I'm most proud of our team, our nurses who are at the bedside. They hear these stories, but they know that we are there for the last chapter. We don't know what all the other chapters were. So sometimes you'll see someone who's not grieving. You'll see someone that doesn't want to stay for the walk of life. You'll see someone that's not responding the way we think they should.
Right.
And I must tell you, and I know my team will agree, we strive every day to make sure that's not happening in our home, because we know that everyone comes with a very different story. And people grieve differently. And as you say, it's a vast difference. David's been here for a few days. He's working with our team. One of the biggest growth areas for hospice, which a lot of people don't know about, is our grief and bereavement programs. They are unfortunately increasing significantly. Our coffee and conversation, I'm looking back, I'm seeing some familiar faces. The room, they're outgrowing the room. I think we may have to do some outside, some bigger sessions, because the group is so large. Joanne does grief groups out by the fire bowl, because again, it's a little bit more space. It's the number one area that's truly growing for our organization. So David's been here for a few days talking to our team, helping us to develop our next steps. So what's that going to look like? We're going to start to see specific groups for death by suicides, for traumatic losses, supporting families who have gone through medical assistance and dying. This is new for us. This is a new level of grief. And just as David said, it's not something that you want to come to a coffee and conversation group, because you might have the person beside you very well-meaning, but they say something that just isn't what you need to hear. So we're starting with help from some of our best in the country to look at our programming. So are there any other questions? We'll stay around. You also know the kettle is always on at hospice to come and have a cup of tea. Put your hand up if you're a hospice volunteer. Wow. Sure. My board members, all your hands go up. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Can I get my team to come up, please? Yep, that's you guys. Joanne, come on. Come on up. Bear with us for a moment, David. These are the people you have imparted your wisdom to for the last couple of days. And also, we did a lunch and learn today for our nursing team. They are oftentimes the one at the bedside who's dealing with the grief every day. Christine is our director of care. Christine was part of the package I received when I took over as executive director, along with Joanne. I was blessed to have them. Christine has moved. She started off as one of our RNs, and she's moved on. Not only did she take the screen off the window, but she's now mentoring all of our nurses as our director of care. So Christine has just come. And every day, I know the hardest part of her job is having to tell the families who can have the next bed, because we know there's probably 5 more that also need it. It's a tough job. We give lots of hugs, and there's cookies back there, right? Yeah. Kelly is our volunteer coordinator. How many volunteers? 150 hospice volunteers, right? Kelly came to us new this year. Again, we only have 5 beds, hopefully 6, cross your fingers at some point. We need to get out into the community. We need to build upon the program that we started with 30 years ago in this community, and that's our visiting program. Mona, the number of people that want to die at home, our volunteers, look at all of you that are here, doctors. When you ask people where they want to be in their own beds. That's where they want to be. We can help them to do that. Maybe Dr. Woods will do a lot of house calls, and we can kind of support when you got some free time. But people want to do that. Doctors are available, can help people. Death doesn't always have to happen in a hospital. So our volunteers are key for us. Joanne keeps the doors opened. She's my right hand, raises money, Smile Cookie, our hike campaign, all those tax receipts. Joanne is our key person. She's a connector out in the community, and we're so grateful to her. Sarah is our social worker. She's come to us with Walter, her lap dog. Sarah has the professional abilities to really support people and also support our volunteers. And Tammy here was one of our nurses. She is the artist behind the Dragonfly. If you come into Tompkins House, down in the family side of the house, there is a large barn quilt. And Tammy has put the names of every single person who has come through Tompkins House on the little arms of our dragonflies. Families come back to find that name, right? They were here. They mattered. That's what you were talking about, right? Oftentimes they just come and touch it. It's something that helps our team every single day. Tammy's our newest. She started off as one of our nurses. She stepped away. And when we started to talk about the need for us to support our community with a greater scope, we created this job. We called it the Supportive Care Coordinator. Do you know what Tammy's job description is? No, that one. She's going to walk with people. She's going to take them by the hand from diagnosis, through the disease process, through death, and then into bereavement. And she's going to look to each one of us to help her to do that. Our hospice is growing substantially. We have important work that we need to do. The success of Tompkins House is just the beginning. This coming year will be our 30th anniversary of Hospice Huronia in this community, but we've got a lot more to do, folks. So these dialogues are going to continue. David, you have really helped you have helped this conversation to begin, and I think you've inspired a lot of people to realize that talking about this isn't as painful, it can be the only way that people can get through it is by talking. And that there are good people like you out there who we can lean on. So we are grateful to you and to Hospice Peterborough for sharing, and for Joanne and her family for taking David in for a couple of days. All of you, if you haven't been through, all of you I think have been through Tompkins House. If you haven't, Fran, you know where the kettle is when you come to see us this week. Maybe tomorrow you're coming for a cup of tea. You're going to put the kettle on, okay? There you go. Lois will be there. Thank you all for coming. Please do take some treats home to your loved ones, and David will be around, as will our team, and come and chat if you need to. Thank you for coming. Get ready for the next dialogues on November 7th, when we'll be bringing Dr. Samantha Winemaker. She has written a book, Hope for the Best, Plan for the Rest. You do not want to miss it. And it'll be right here on November 7th. Thank you, folks.